The Indigenization of Christianity in Southeast Asia by Christina Vistal, Master of ASEAN Studies. Southeast Asia, in general, is considered as one of the religiously and culturally diverse regions in the world. Home to around 640 million people, this culturally diverse region is bonded with a common pursuit for peaceful coexistence. Another distinctive feature that the countries in this region possess is that they were able to form a regional organization, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, despite their various political, economic, and socio-cultural differences. Today, the 50-year-old ASEAN is composed of 10 member states, namely Brunei Darussalam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, and is touted as one of the sustainable regional blocs in the world. Notably, the ASEAN culture is an amalgamation of local traditions and various foreign influences. These influences, in fact, were acquired in several ways, either through contact with foreign merchants such as the Chinese, Indians, and Middle East Asians during the maritime trade, and through Western colonization, as was the case of the European powers. Foreign influences likewise paved the way to the introduction and adaptation of dominant world religions such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity to the ASEAN people. Even with the dominance of world religions, the locals' indigenous beliefs cannot be entirely eradicated, since the latter is an indispensable factor to the lives of the ASEAN people. On the other hand, the world religions should likewise credit its flourishing existence over the majority of the ASEAN populace to indigenous religions as well. This is due to the locals' incorporation of indigenous beliefs to the tenets of world religions in order to make the latter more relevant to the ethno-cultural backgrounds of the ASEAN peoples. Basically, this video presentation will focus on how Christianity, a major world religion, was indigenized by a significant number of the ASEAN populace. According to the Center of the Study for Global Christianity, as of 2016, Southeast Asia is composed of around 150 million Christians out of the 640 million religiously diverse populace. This accounts 23.4% of the ASEAN's total population. Conquest and colonialism were largely responsible for the establishment of Christianity throughout the Southeast Asian region. Basically, Christianity arrived in Southeast Asia early in the 16th century. It was introduced first in the Philippines and to a much more limited extent by the Portuguese in Malay Peninsula and in present-day eastern Indonesia and East Timor, followed by the French Jesuits in Vietnam, and eventually further developed by the British and Americans. The Spanish and the Portuguese likewise faced competition from other world religions, especially Islam and Buddhism. However, the Spanish were more successful in their ability to spread Christianity, especially in the Philippines, as compared to the Portuguese, since they were too few in number. The Christians in the Philippines accounts 90% of its total population. Catholicism was brought to the Philippines by the Spaniards who came to colonize the islands during the 16th century. The initial contact was made in 1521, when Magellan and his crew accidentally hit the island of Homonhon. They held the first mass in Limasawa and converted Humabon and his followers in Cebu. However, the new religion did not take roots until Legazpi arrived in 1565 and took possession of the islands for the Spanish crown. Spain came to the Philippines with a clear dual purpose: to Christianize the inhabitants and to increase the territorial domains of the Spanish monarch. In order to facilitate the process of conversion and to effect administrative control over the people, a policy of regrouping scattered settlements into compact villages, known as cabeceras, was adopted. By the beginning of the 1600s, most of the inhabitants of the Philippines had been Christianized. Within hearing distance of church bells, they lived under the watchful eyes of the Spanish friars and soldiers. With the passage of time, the colony was divided into provinces and bishoprics, and the Christianized natives, called Indios, were provided with two forms of identity: that of a Catholic and that of a subject of a Spanish king. They were studiously isolated from the Muslims and other peoples of Southeast Asia, except when they were needed to serve as soldiers to extend the frontiers of the Spanish Empire. Christians in Malaysia accounts 9.2% of its total population, while Brunei Darussalam accounts 10% Christians in their total population. Unlike those of the Spaniards, the results of Portuguese missionary activities in the Malay Peninsula and elsewhere in Southeast Asia were limited. Initially, missionaries under Portuguese patronage were successful in establishing a mission in Malacca and in the Moluccas. In the latter, however, the greed and rapacity of Portuguese officials nullified the work of the missionaries and caused enraged Muslims to capture the Portuguese Ternate Fort in 1574. Missionary activities in Brunei also failed. In 1795, the British occupied Malacca, which, after a brief occupation by the Dutch, was then returned to them in 1824. The British primacy in the peninsula during the 19th century, however, did not witness any vigorous Christian missionary activity. But in general, the Islamic manifestation and its steady development in Malaya were left untouched by the British. About 10% of the population in Indonesia are Christians. Archaeological evidences of the existence of Christian communities in Southeast Asia, probably Nestorians in the Malay Peninsula, Sumatra, and Java, can be traced back to the 7th century. During Portuguese colonization in the 16th century, and also at the beginning of the Dutch rule in the 17th century, the majority of those who later were to become Indonesians practiced their traditional religions. Dominicans, Jesuits, and various Protestant missionaries began to spread the Christian faith among the adherers of the autochthonous religions. In the 20th century, Christianity expanded to the part of Flores, as well as to Timor, Roti, Sawu, Central Sulawesi, and among the Chinese minority. On the other hand, it is indisputable that Protestant and Catholic ideologies had a such significant share in the implementation and acceptance of foreign rule. While the colonial administrators played off the local customs against Islam, the missionaries tried to replace indigenous structures, ideas, and most notably, religions with Christianity and European communities. There are an estimated 6 million to 10 million Catholics in Vietnam, making up 6% to 10% of the population, making Vietnam home to the second biggest Catholic community in Southeast Asia after the Philippines. Vietnamese Catholics owe their existence to French missionaries who began their work in the 17th century. Roman Catholicism is the oldest form of Christianity in Vietnam. It was introduced to Vietnam in the 17th century by the Portuguese. Traditionally, there has been some friction between Buddhists and Catholics, and as of the modern period, Catholics make about 10% of the 9 million people in Ho Chi Minh City in southern Vietnam. On the other hand, Christianity is the minority religion in the countries of Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. Laos has around 1.5 Christians in its population, while Cambodia has 2% and Myanmar 4%. Christianity was introduced into Cambodia by Roman Catholic missionaries in 1660, while in Myanmar, the first Catholic mission came in 1721. It built a large brick church in 1750, which still exists today. Most Christians in Myanmar belong to the Karen, Kachin, and Chin ethnic groups. Moreover, Christian missionaries began working in the country in the 19th century that made numerous converts among some of the minority groups. During the 16th and 17th centuries, Portuguese and Spanish Dominicans and other missionaries introduced Christianity to Thailand. Christian missions have had only modest success in winning converts among the Thai, and the Christian community, estimated at 260,000, was proportionately the smallest in any Asian country. The missions played an important role, however, as agents for the transmission of Western ideas to the Thai. Missionaries opened hospitals, introduced Western medical knowledge, and sponsored some excellent private elementary and secondary schools. The expansion of Christianity in Southeast Asia entered a new phase in the 19th century, one that has continued into the present. Some of these has involved people converting from one of the other world religions. This pattern of conversion occurred due to the larger expansion of Western civilization and political, military, and economic power. Another reason would be that the spread of Christianity in Southeast Asia was mainly based on missionization. Though early missionization sometimes came before it, colonial rule did many things that fostered the introduction and spread of Christianity. It involved pacification and the creation of a structure of European government that made countries safer and easier for missionary penetration. With the spread of Christianity in the region through the conversions made in the early periods, the manner on how Christianity was localized and adapted to the religious and cultural background of various Southeast Asian societies will serve as an important means in understanding Southeast Asian version of Christianity. For local converts, Christian connections also fostered emotional attachments to distant religious hierarchies and to a heritage of saintly protectors, reminding believers of the global spread of this new faith. Filipinos in the Philippines celebrated the holy days of devout men and women who had lived long ago in faraway countries. Sometimes bestowed, sometimes personally selected, the baptismal names of converts proclaim personalized and meaningful ties with the saintly figures of Christianity's larger world. Protestantism in Indonesia, on the other hand, with its abhorrence of saint worship, had no such traditions, but converts were given new Dutch names. On the other hand, the most divisive issue concerned the degree to which Christian teaching should be tailored to be more compatible with local customs and practices. The localization of early modern Catholicism, by contrast, was far more successful, although it followed a number of different paths. On one hand, there were areas where links to large alpha centers were weakened to such an extent that Catholic communities became independent owners of localized practices. Undoubtedly, the most effective localization of Christianity occurred in the Philippines, where the domestication of Hispanic Catholicism in virtually every aspect of Christian life has generated a corpus of historical studies. Currently, one of the country's famous Catholic religious architecture is the Basilica Minore del Santo Niño de Cebu and the Magellan's Cross. Innumerable other conceptualizations and their tangible representations, such as revered images, celebrations associated with a particular location, pre-existing holy places now transformed into pilgrimage sites, show how the dynamics of Filipino cultures successfully tamed the behemoth of Spanish Catholicism. Indeed, the goal of Christianization was undertaken in the belief that teachings and practices, as they had evolved in Europe, could be successfully transported to very different environments. The early modern period was a critical period in Christianity's claim to be a world religion, but in Southeast Asia as elsewhere, responses to the missionizing endeavor varied from negotiation and acceptance to apathy and outright resistance. Southeast Asia is particularly interesting because here we can compare different interpretations of Christianity, notably Catholicism and Protestantism. As of the contemporary period, Christianity brought varied effects to the lives of various Southeast Asian societies. In the Philippines, where there is a Christian majority, Christianity has been widely accepted by the people. But with the rest of the Southeast Asian countries, where Christianity is the religion of the minority groups, religious persecutions, unfortunately, has always been present. What can be done as of the moment is for the ASEAN leaders to strengthen the promotion of religious diversity through issuing declarations, joint statements, and communiques in order to promote peaceful coexistence among the religiously diverse Southeast Asian peoples. And and only by then we would attain a sustainable ASEAN people-centered society.